And then, yeah, Kito, over to you. Do an introduction and then take us right into it. Thank you very much.
Okay, sounds good. Everybody hear me okay? Is that a
Yes,
yes?
yes, yes,
All right,
yes.
good.
I can hear you.
Okay, good. All right, cool. Uh, okay, so I'm gonna try and share my screen. I'm not sure if my resolution will work, so we'll have to see if it'll work here. But let me try. And video settings. So I always forget how the different meeting apps work. So let's see. Where is the share button? Okay, there we go. Okay.
Michael,
So let's see. Okay.
Zoom.
All right. Can people tell me, is this too wide for people? Does this look okay? Looks all right to me. Okay. All right, good. Okay, so, uh-oh, whoops, wrong screen.
Don't shout it, just believe.
Hold on 1 second here. I'm dealing with the with multiple screens. Okay.
Oh yeah,
Hey.
the name you can get it.
This
People
is
before they have my
one
name.
wonderful thing about the Mac is sometimes it gets confused about which screen is supposed to be displayed. All right, so I'm just going to show a couple slides about myself so I can just give you a sense of who I am. And then I'll talk more about the specific project I'm working on and a couple other ones which may be more interesting to some people that are related. So I run a tiny consulting company called Virtua, and we do consulting and architecture development training, etc., around a variety of technologies. Mostly, we're very heavily entrenched in the Java community, the Java ecosystem. We work with a technology called Jakartee EE, which is used in a lot of enterprise applications. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. We also do front-end development with frameworks like Angular and Capacitor for mobile web. We're really into web components, which is a standard for building reusable components that work in different web frameworks. So we kind of do front-end and back-end and cloud stuff and all sorts of development along those lines. We're also working on a side project for frequent speakers called speakertracks.com. I host or co-host a podcast called Stacked Podcast. You can find it in any podcasting app like Apple Podcast or Spotify. We only post an episode every month or two, but usually we talk about front-end stuff, back-end stuff, a lot of Java. We also have industry speakers on there. And as a matter of fact, Neil's going to be on there on Friday. So we won't put that one out for like a month or so. But so that's a great podcast to check out if you like podcasts. You can find me on these links up here. And of course, what I'll do is make sure that for the next couple of weeks, I'm available in Discord as well to help out with anyone. Also, there is a Slack channel for the projects that I'm working on as well. But this is a good place to find out more about me, one of these places. I'm also a Java champion, and that means that I've been involved in the Java community for a long time and involved in promoting and working with Java as well. And the project we'll be talking about mostly is the Eclipse documentation for Jakartee EE, but I'll talk about a couple other projects as well. And I've also spoken at lots of conferences over the years as well. So that's my story. And what I wanted to get a handle from you guys is sort of an idea about everybody's background. So I know you can't really say that much, but if you could just drop in the chat, like, first of all, what programming languages do you like to usually work with? Do you like documentation? That's a good question for this particular project. Are you interested in documentation? And how long you've been developing. Are you junior developer, senior developer, etc. If you could just put that in the chat, that would be useful just to give me a background of the context of everybody here. All right, now I see that chat here.
Thank you.
Okay. So is the chat, is that the messages on the oh, there I am. I see now. Okay. I see Raymond. Okay. All right. Raymond, junior React and Python developer. Okay, guys, don't be shy. I'm sure someone else has some information. So there we go. There's someone else. Okay, so we've got JavaScript, Python, a couple junior devs, one senior dev. Okay. All right, so if you guys can continue putting stuff in there, that'd be great, just to give me a handle on the context. Okay. Excellent. Okay, so one of the things I want to point out, is that I think one of the things you'll find out as your career grows is that the ability to work with and understand different tools and languages is really, really helpful. So I've been in the industry for over 20 years, and obviously Java's been my core because it came out like early in my career, and I've just been working with it a lot, and it's grown and it continues to evolve and get better and better. But I've also spent a lot of time writing JavaScript, a lot of JavaScript over the years, done a lot of TypeScript, I've done Python, and back in the day I even did Perl, do a lot of bash scripting, and I've worked with a lot of different JVM languages like Groovy, things like that, and written a lot of testing stuff and a lot of backend stuff and documentation. So it's good to get an idea about how different tools and ecosystems work. So I think this might be good for some of you that have familiar more with like the JavaScript or Python ecosystems, because this is a different ecosystem. So I think this will be kind of neat for you guys to see how things work differently. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just go over, kind of give you an idea, a sense of what the project is that I'm mostly working with, and then how you can contribute, and talk about a couple other related projects that you may want to contribute to as well, or instead of, and we can go from there. So let me stop. Let me get rid of the slideshow here. Okay. And I'll just show I'll stop sharing for a second, Actually, here's my question. So how many people have heard of this organization before? Okay. Anyone heard of this before? Apache? Just do the thumbs up if you have. Okay, so we got a few people. Okay. Oh, a lot of people. Okay, awesome. All right. So the Apache Software Foundation is just that. It's a nonprofit foundation whose job is basically to build open source. And as you can see, they've been around since 1999. The most popular product they had was the Apache web server, which is still really popular. But they've got like dozens and dozens of hundreds of projects. And mostly what they've been known for recently are a lot of projects related to big data. So like Apache Spark and a whole bunch of ones around that whole sort of big data world as well. But they've got dozens and dozens of projects. So if you look at projects here, you go here, you'll see, you go to see all projects. There's like a lot of stuff here, and actually, and then they have so many, they're not even just listing them, they're giving you categories, projects, and then languages. Okay, so that's one open source foundation, right? So when it comes to open source, it can either be an individual, a company, or an organization. or like a nonprofit. So another very large nonprofit is the Eclipse Foundation. How many people? Oh, so we've got a no. Okay. All right. So it sounds like not many people are familiar with the Eclipse Foundation. Okay. So the Eclipse Foundation is similar in the sense that it's a nonprofit that has lots of open source projects. The governance rules, the rules by which the open source projects are maintained, is a little more strict than it is for Apache. But it's the same idea of having a foundation that gets money from different companies and organizations, but and then has different products. The number one product they had initially, just the same way that Apache sort of started with the Apache web server, Eclipse started with the Eclipse IDE or code editor. And it was really popular for a long time. They still make it. It still has lots of features, and some people still use it. One of my colleagues uses it all the time. But the organization has grown to be really huge. So if I go to projects, and actually IBM was the original company that started the Eclipse Foundation. So if I go to projects, first of all, it tells me which areas, right? Do I want developer tools, cloud native, edge and IoT, and mobility, all this stuff, right? So I could pick which one, and what we're actually interested in is what they call cloud native, and they have a lot of projects here. Two main ones are Adoptium and Jakartee EE. Now I'll get back to these in a second, but if you go to any of these other categories, like there used to be just a big, used to be just a big way you could find out a list of all the projects, but I don't see it anymore. Yeah, they have this. I can't find it, but there is a oh, here we go. Project Finder. This is what I was looking for. Okay. So the Project Finder lets you find any project, and you notice there are a lot here. So, and most of these projects go through like an incubating phase, and where they're basically trying to see if the project is really going to live, and a mature phase where it's actually a real project. Whereas with open source, like if I decided to do an open source project by myself, there's no real phase, right? It's just it lives or dies depending on who contributes or how popular it gets. So with the foundations, there's a little more of a structure in terms of deciding, the lifespan of a project. But if I pick mature, I get this huge list, right? And you see how many pages there are, right? So the foundation, Eclipse, has this many different open source projects, okay? And there are a lot. Now, a lot of these aren't always like that visible. So like, for example, this Eclipse modeling framework, okay? This is an umbrella project that has other projects in it. The Eclipse Foundation also does AsciiDoc, which is similar to Markdown. It's a way to write documentation. But some of these are projects that are part of a larger whole. So for example, the Eclipse, the modeling workflow engine, probably only works inside of the Eclipse IDE platform. So while there may be lots of projects, the actual product that you use might be something that contains several different products. But there's a lot here. So I'm just trying to give you guys some sort of context here. So the Eclipse Foundation has lots and lots of projects, right? Now, if I go back here and I go to Cloud Native, okay, there were a few different projects listed here, right? So there's Jakartee EE and Eclipse Yasin, which is one particular, it's a way to work with Java and JSON documents and XML, things like that. But here's Jakartee EE. And I will jump over here, okay? So what Jakartee EE is, it's a open source ecosystem for what we call cloud native architectures with enterprise Java. So think of it in terms of if you're building applications that need to do things like manage a lot of data or just for a web application, write different microservices, things like that, running either in the cloud or in the company's own data center. Jakartee EE has a way to do all that stuff.
The
Okay.
the other person is want to say she's not around.
How many people have heard
I want to
of
get
Spring
something. I don't know.
before?
Stories.
Spring. Okay,
I want
excellent.
to
So a lot of
get
people have heard of
something.
Spring.
Cool.
So Jakartee EE is pretty similar to Spring in some ways. To give you a bit of history, back in the day, a long time ago, we're talking like 10, 15 years ago or more, there was a way to build what we called enterprise applications, which were like, powerful business processes, and also simple applications as well. So that was called Java EE, is what it was called. And it was supported by a lot of major companies. And then something came along called Spring, which was the Spring framework, which was open source. And at the time, a lot of the Java EE stuff wasn't open source because it was before open source was so pervasive as it is now. So Spring came along, and Spring actually uses a lot of the standards that are part of the Java EE platform. And then eventually what happened over time is Spring kept on growing and becoming more feature complete. They came out with Spring Boot, which was a new thing a long time ago, as a great way of starting a new Spring application and make things a lot easier in terms of working with Spring. And Oracle had bought some microsystems which created Java EE, or Java, I should say. And Oracle kind of dropped its feet on the Java EE stuff. So Spring grew, had done very well. And Oracle eventually donated all of that Java EE code and all the specifications and everything to the Eclipse Foundation. This was actually many years ago. So whereas, and then the Eclipse Foundation brought it back to life, renamed it. It took a long time. People like me have been involved along the way. And now it's actually, growing, and there's new features and everything. So basically, you can think of Jakartee EE as a whole bunch of standards. Okay, so whereas Spring is a whole bunch of open source projects that just get built and people add to them, and also if you wanted to commit to Spring, it's much harder. It's much more of a closed ecosystem in terms of the way you can contribute to Spring. Jakartee EE is a little bit different. So it's in much more of an open ecosystem because it's run by an open source foundation. But also, the product of Jakartee EE is not necessarily like an application that you can run or a framework that you can use. It's a whole bunch of what we call specifications. So if we look here, there are specifications, and you see there's all these different things. So you can browse the specifications, and what it is each specification is a documentation that explains how some feature is supposed to work. So these are the Jakartee platform, Jakartee web profile. These are kind of umbrellas that include lots of different specifications, but these are the individual specifications. So like there's a specification for how authentication is supposed to work. There's a specification for specific annotations that can be used in code. There's a specification for the dependency injection container, which is what Spring has a different dependency injection container, but they're similar in a lot of ways. There's a specification for how configuration is supposed to be handled. And then for how data is handled, all sorts of different features, right? And so each one of these has a documentation and it has its own life cycle, and then it's up to individual companies and organizations to implement their own versions. So what happens is, in practical purposes, each of these are individual specifications. And then if you look at compatible products, these are actual products that use these specifications. So there's Apache has one. There's these other companies, which I'm not too familiar with. I think this one's in Japan. Eclipse has one as well. Fujitsu does. Peloton is from Oracle. JBoss does. IBM does, etc. So these are all the different products that use these features. And that's what's different is like Spring is just one product, whereas Jakarta EE is a set of standards that different communities can use. And that's really the main difference. So then when it comes to actually, if you were to go get a job to work with a Jakarta EE product, it would be something like, going to work with a company that's using Open Liberty, or a company that's using Pyara, or a company that's using Quarkus, which is another one, or Wildfly, or one of these different products. Okay. So that's sort of the story. There's a lot of tangents, which I'm happy to go in with to anyone afterwards, but that's kind of the idea. All right. So I've rambled a lot. Does anyone have any questions so far?
I gave him that day, Abby, your assistant. Who is the follower?
Let me know if I'm talking too fast. I have a tendency to do that sometimes. No questions. Okay. Wow. All right. Okay. So what I'll do now, since you hopefully have some background, is I'll talk about 3 different projects, and the first one is the project that I'm the lead for. And I'll talk about a couple other ones which may be interesting as well. So one of the things I've done over my career is I wrote one book, but I wrote it like 20 years ago. But I like writing. I haven't done much of it recently, but I do like it. And a couple of years ago, the Eclipse Foundation said, "Hey, we have this Jakarta EE tutorial, and would you like to help out?" So what we did is we took this.
The content you want him to do.
My company, we took this old
Michael.
set of documentation. So this is. Let me go to the top here. So if you were to look for a Jakarta EE tutorial,
I mean, like, what's this?
It looks something like this. So this is a file, right? Documentation, and every different framework or product has some sort of tutorial, right? And it looked like this. It was kind of long, and on the left-hand side, you had to go through and look at all these different things. But it worked, but it was also a little bit out of date. Okay. Okay. So this is the current version of the tutorial. So we updated the platform now, and you can do search inside the docs. If I search for I don't know, web.
You have content that want
I can get information on all this stuff in here.
No, even if it's picture now.
And then on the left-hand side here, I have all the different sections that I can see easily what they are, what they mean. Okay. And then the other main thing about this platform that we chose is that you can actually change versions. And you see this with lots of different products, right? Where you're looking at one version of the documentation and you're like, well, what about the version that I'm using? So you can, on this side here, go to pick a different version of the tutorial. So right now, the latest version of Jakarta EE is 11, but most companies have only implemented 10. So I can go to 10. And then if I want to go back, I can go back to 9.1, which is the prior version. Okay. Also, this framework that we're using can support different types of documentation. So if you notice down here, I also have the cargo tracker docs. I'll talk about those in a minute. This is a completely separate product, but the documentation framework that we're using is the same. So that's basically what we did. We also tried to update the information as much as possible as well to make it more up to date. There's a lot more work we'd love to do, but this is what we have. And also there's this cool little edit this page feature, which takes you to GitHub, and then you can, pose a PR and all that kind of stuff. So let me get rid of that. Okay. So that's sort of handy too, is that people can very easily create PRs against the documentation.
So you're welcome.
So that's sort of the project. So if I were to go to look at this on GitHub, I can go to the Jakarta EE group,
So,
which is, has lots of projects. Let's see,
I
they
did not
have,
think of this part where I'm going to be
which would
inside
just
this.
tell you the count of the
If I
projects.
thought of it, I wouldn't have agreed.
68, okay. So Jakarta EE itself has 68 repositories. Now, some of these repositories are just specifications, and then the code is usually in a different repo in a different organization. But our project is the Jakarta EE tutorial and documentation. So first, I'll take you to the tutorial. Okay, and I'll get rid of that. Okay, so this is Jakarta EE tutorial. E for J tutorial, we need to get rid of that one. And you'll see it's your normal project. It's got a few different folders in here. And then there's, of course, information about it. Okay. So the main thing here
You
is
can
it
open
says
the
it's,
majority of property.
the source files are authored in ASCII doc. Now, I mentioned ASCII doc earlier, which happens to be also run by the Eclipse Foundation, but that's really irrelevant who runs it. But so how many people have heard of ASCII doc? Anybody?
Most of you uploaded there. I don't want to be.
We got a no, a yes. Okay. All right. How many people have heard of Markdown? All right. So everybody says yes, as I expected, right? So Markdown is an easy way to write documentation, right? But if you try to use it to write like anything complicated, like a book or a large piece of documentation, it's very, very limited. And what you'll find is you have to use GitHub flavor to Markdown or something else flavor to Markdown or something. There's no big standard, right? Whereas ASCII doc is sort of like Markdown, but it has all the features that all the different versions of Markdown have all in one. So it actually has its own specification and everything. And just like anything else, anybody can implement it. So our documentation is written in ASCII doc because ASCII doc is really, really good for writing documentation. So if I were to look at here,
Don't worry.
here,
No, you must get.
Go down to modules, and then I can go.
You must get. I will give you I wanted to give my own to Martin.
Okay.
So, but the guy works.
All right. So you see these files end in They end in ADoc. Okay. And GitHub does have integrated support for ASCII doc, which is great. You can find a plugin for any IDE, whether you're using IntelliJ IDE or VS Code or something else. And I use VS Code, but right now I've been using the JetBrains IDEs. And the ASCII doc support there is really good in the plugin. I'm assuming there's a good plugin for VS Code as well. But you can see this is what it looks like. But if we look at the code, it looks like this. So it looks a little bit similar to Markdown, right? It's just that some of the characters are different, right? You see, this is an XREF, which is a link to another document inside of this documentation. It looks a little bit like a Markdown link, but not quite. And then, of course, you have different sections. You can import images. All of our images are SVG, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's similar to Markdown, but better. It's a good way to think of it. And of course, there is an ASCIIdoc.org.
You know the problem.
You can go and there's ASCIIdoc.org. There's ASCII Doctor. ASCII Doctor is the implementation that we use. But either one of those, you can go to learn more about it. And you see, here's a good example here. It's pretty straightforward. And you can do includes and all sorts of things, which is helpful for us because we can actually include parts of documents and reference other documents and things like that. So let's see, where were we? Is called Antora. Has anyone heard of Antora? It's written by a guy that I've known for, or a company run by a guy that I known for a long time, who wrote ASCII Doctor, which is the ASCII doc processor. But Antora, we go to the Antora link. This is a good way to put a single or multi-repository documentation site generator for tech writers who like writing in ASCII doc. So from our perspective, the Jakartee documentation was already in ASCII doc anyways. So we were like, well, if we want to actually have a better documentation site, we should use something that works well with that. And that's what Entora does. So Entora is sort of the framework that we're using. Think of it like a web framework or something. And then ASCII doc is the language for the documentation. Now, Entora happens to be written in JavaScript, so it runs on Node. And it uses YAML for configuration, but that's the story. So basically, if we look at the site here, the new site, which go back over here. And there is other documentation too. Like if you were actually starting, there's little guides you can use. But all right, so this look and feel is sort of run by Entora. So there's actually 3 repos. There's one that has the content, which is the tutorial repo. There's the documentation repo, which has sort of the master configuration. And then there's a UI repo, which has all the JavaScript and CSS assets. And then they all get built together into this nice, pretty UI. And so Entora gives us a very opinionated way to do all this stuff and pulls up. And these are the other repos I mentioned. The documentation site, which is the main documentation, the UI part. And then there's also some examples as well, which are used in here, which are helpful for newbies to Jakartee, but of course also to people that, that's where we put the examples that are used in the documentation. Okay. So, and like any projects, we have a contribution guide that provides additional details about, oh, I didn't mean to actually go to that file. Sorry. Oh yeah, that's right, actually. Okay, yeah. So this gives you all the details about the coding guidelines, how to handle branches, commits, creating diagrams. This is another part of it. There are a lot of pictures in here, right? And what we do is we use a tool called draw.io and then save it in that format. And has anyone heard of draw.io before? Just curious, like seeing who knows which tools. So we got a few people. Cool. Okay. So draw.io is free. It's like a really great sort of alternative to the commercial tools. And because it's free and open source, that's a good choice for us to use for documentation for an open source project. So there's a contribution guide there. A style guide. So if anyone's actually writing, this tells them how to write their prose, which is very important. Think of this like coding standards. So that's important as well. And inside of all 3 projects, there of course are issues, right? So what we've done, and what I'll be doing over the next couple of days is adding more issues. I need to do it anyways because there's a new version of Jakartee EE, and also this will help give you guys more options to work with. But they're all labeled. So
when I'm done.
there are issues that people have added.
Yeah. That's why I'm carrying my
Most of them,
laptop around.
though, are
I just want
ones
to
like
take
this
it, you know,
financial mutual label someone added. There's no plan currently unless someone wants to help us out with that. But you could, these things are all labeled, help wanted, or good first issue.
For the person that on the social media challenge.
There's only one right now. And a lot of these things, and the reason this is actually a good project for people to join in is that a lot of some of the issues are pretty simple. It's like, someone needs to go and edit some things or change some things, and no one's necessarily had time to do it. So this is actually a good example. And someone's actually already working on this, I believe. But so this is basically saying currently the Jakarta XML binding link under advanced topics doesn't work. So that's kind of an issue, right? So if I go back to the documentation, which I had open somewhere. second. Go to it here. Okay. So what it's saying is that this link under here, actually it's not there. Where was it? Actually, I'm not sure where. Is it this link? There was one of these links that wasn't working. I don't remember which one it was. Actually, it's this one. See, I can't click on it. So basically, it's just the task is this with a couple of links on it. So a lot of the tasks are really simple. Obviously, if there are people who want to do more, there's more that can be done. But
Do you have
a lot of the
internships?
tasks are pretty straightforward. So you'll find that there are issues here you can take a look at. Now I mentioned there are 3 repos. If I go back over here,
Format is using my phone.
this is the one with all the content, right? And as I
So
mentioned
it's
before,
cutting
there's
my
actually a
network.
lot of content. So if you go in here, there's modules, right? There's a root module that has like the
Is
navigation
it strong here?
part, right? And then there's the individual sections, and there's a lot of
That's it.
content
I'm recording
here.
this.
And most of the
If
tasks
you
will
log
involve
that
like
out of
editing
this,
this or changing
and
this or doing
no
something
go
like
good for
that.
YouTube again.
But aside from the content, there's also the main documentation site, which is that link there. Okay. So that's this site. And this site is basically doesn't have a lot in here. If you notice, it just has the Antora playbook and the Antora assembler. So just configuration to basically run all the other stuff. Okay.
I can see it
So
from beginning to end
the
now.
playbook
I can see it from
basically
beginning to
says
end
it's the
now.
YAML
I can see
file
it from beginning to
that
end
points
now.
to the name of documentation, the starting page, the different branches that'll be
Oh,
loaded,
this place is very noisy now.
and the repos they're
I
from.
want to
Because
go
what we
outside,
can
but
do is
my
pull
internet will not
documentation
because
from
it's my
different
phone that
repos and then
see, you know
assemble
what?
that into one
They
site.
should use
Okay.
Michael's phone.
So the documentation project just basically
Nice.
handles all that configuration stuff. Okay, so it's sort of a master repo. However, sometimes there are changes we need to make here as well. So there's an issue tracker here. I just added this one myself because I wanted to add Slack information to the READMEs. So there's not a lot going on in here, but this is some, if you work on this project, you may have to look in here as well. The other area we have is the documentation UI project. So documentation UI project is basically where all the CSS artifacts are handled. And you notice it actually uses an old build system. Does anyone remember Gulp at all? So before some of the more modern systems. Someone remembers it. Okay, good. So it uses an older build system called Gulp, which actually is just fine for this kind of project because it's not very complicated. But it doesn't use Webpack or anything fancy like that. But all the instructions are here. So if there's a change that affects the UI, that goes in this repo. And right now there's a couple things. Oh yeah, this is an ongoing issue. So there's not as much going on in here. But if there's something that affects the UI, it usually goes in this repo. Okay. So those are the different repos. And
I don't know this song, but I know the kind of song.
Again, I'll be adding more issues this week for people to take a look at. But this basically gives you a chance to work with a completely different stack and platform, like what it's like to actually write documentation. We do also have GitHub Actions. This gets deployed via continuous integration. So if you build something, if you change some documentation and push it to the right branch, it actually will get published to the Eclipse site automatically as well. And there's also a build process that uses Antora underneath that allows you to test out the changes locally and everything. And again, project that I'm working on, but I'm going to show you a couple more in the last few minutes we have that may be more interested in if you want to write more actual code. Anyone have any questions?
So, hey, Kito. So one of the things that I've noticed lots of people struggle a little bit is they want to contribute, but they kind of struggle setting up the project locally.
Yes.
So could you talk a little bit about how to set up this locally?
Yeah. So, all right. So I'll talk a little bit about it, and then I'll offer a potential solution. Okay. All right. So here is my setup. Okay. So you see, I've
my
got
phone,
all
eh?
three repos here.
Can I
These
have it?
are
Because I think my
in
internet is lagging.
JetBrains IntelliJ.
My internet is lagging
These are
so badly.
individual modules,
So when
but
you move to that,
whatever. As long
when
as you can
move
put
to
all
that
three
end,
projects together in your IDE, that'll make
yes,
your life
deploy.
easier. But basically, I've got all three of these up and running. I've done all the installation, right? I've
Anytime you
installed
move down,
Java
you used to pause.
and Node, which are the two main things.
Relax.
I think that's all we need, just Java and Node for the most part, and NVM for managing different versions of Node. That's handy. I have my Jakartee documentation project checked out here, right? And all of these different repos are on the same level. You know, they're in the same folder, so they're right next to each other in my file system. And so I have the Entor playbook, but I also have this thing called a local Entor playbook as well.
What do you want me to do with laptop now?
And the local Entor playbook allows me to do things differently if I want to. So I could like put a different branch here to test locally. I could put a path here if I wanted to as well. But all this is here. And now all I have to do, now that I have my local copy, right? And I have all these at the same level, you know, next to each other in the same folder. And I've installed all the prerequisites. Right?
See, I've danced too.
I can do. Yeah. All right. So if you look at the README here. Okay. Basically, once you've installed Maven, Maven is another thing you have to install. It's like the build tool that we use in a lot of Java projects. Oh yeah, there's a little bit of Ruby setup you have to do too. See, lots of different languages involved, right? Because ASCII Docker is written in Ruby. But there's this author mode here. Okay. So basically, if you have Maven set up, which is this MVN, you can run this command, right? And what this is going to do is run all the build stuff for Antora, right? Which you can see as a npx. Okay. And it's going to build everything locally. Everything has to be again on the right folder structure. And then I'll be able to look at it locally. Okay. So it takes a minute, so I'm not gonna almost out of time, so I don't want to get too into that. But it'll build it, and I can look at it locally, and then I can make changes and everything locally before I push. That's the very quick overview. However, we had a Google student, a summer of code student working with us over the summer, and he actually created a PR, which I think here it is. So I need to merge this. I need to test it out and merge it. But this is a build script that he created that will do some of the setup for you. So he had the same concern that you mentioned. So basically, it'll go through, build the documentation, switch to the documentation repository, build that, build the playbook, and then also if you're making changes to the bundle, which he had to do, you can. There's a step for that as well. So I'll be merging this very soon, and this will be another way that you can do it if you don't want to go through the manual steps. This is pretty handy. So that's what I would say. So. And when it comes to setting it up, I'll make sure his name is Noah. Either he or me or someone else can help out if you have any problems. So hopefully that helps.
I'm done. Let's do this thing now. This dance.
Okay. All right, so I'll spend just in the last 5 minutes just mentioning a couple other projects. So if you look at this and you're thinking, oh man, I have absolutely no interest in editing ASCII files. If you're thinking I have no interest in editing ASCII files or or working with documentation, there's a couple other projects you could look at that are also part of the same umbrella, which is the Jakartee EE.
What's going on? Are we not dancing?
And these will be a good chance to get just playing with simple, or not necessarily simple, but other Java projects. So there are two. One is the Eclipse Cargo Tracker. Okay. And this is basically an application of domain-driven design for Jakartee EE. So it's like a test, not a test, but it's an example of using domain-driven design with these sets of APIs, essentially. Has anyone heard of domain-driven design before? Anybody? Okay. So the answer is no. All right, so this might be a good learning area. So domain-driven design it's more about it's about building your application based on the understanding of your problem's domain, right? Which is basically the language and understanding of the actual problem domain. So, for example, if you're building, as the example implies, cargo tracker, right? You're tracking cargo on different ships, for example. First, you want to sit down and say, okay, well, what am I working with? I'm working with ships. I'm working with cargo containers. I'm working with trucks that bring the cargo to the port. I'm working with ports. And then you would basically extract from that sort of the scaffolding for the domain of your application. So this uses that whole approach and it explains how that whole thing works. You can also learn more about domain language and the whole domain-driven design, all that kind of stuff as well. So this is basically an example application, but it's pretty powerful. Like it actually does a lot of stuff. There was a version that was up and running publicly, but it's down, unfortunately. So they have instructions for Visual Studio Code for working with it, and instructions for how to run it. They also have documentation, which is in our documentation project, which they just did over the summer. This is the change that they made. So this is all the documentations about getting started and more about domain-driven design. And you see, this gives you an example, a picture of sort of how domain-driven design works in this particular project. Okay, so that's a brief overview of the project. Again, you can look at it to learn more. And just like our project, they've done a good job with issues. So inside the issue tracker, they have labeled things as, good first issue, help wanted, etc. Okay. So. Enable help. It doesn't work. All right. Here we go. Okay, so they have stuff labeled very well, like help wanted, good first issue, etc. And some of these are going to be more meaty than what we had, but like for example, a JMeter stress test is a pretty good thing if you're interested in actually stress testing an application, writing some load tests. That's a good thing to look at. So that's one project you can contribute to. Another one is the Eclipse Starter for Jakartee EE. So this is a project that's used to generate sort of a starter application similar to the Spring Starter or any other framework that let you sort of pick something from a UI and then generate an artifact to work with. So you can pick the version of Jakartee EE you want, the platform you want, or the profile, which means like the number of features that you want, the version, the runtime. Remember I said there's different implementations of Jakartee EE, whether you want Docker support, etc. And then you click generate, and it gives you a zip file which has all that stuff in it to start with. And I think you can also have it generate Maven information as well. But you can do all that. So that's the project. And of course, the issue tracker is here, or the project is here on GitHub. And of course, has all the information you need. And then if we go back to the issue tracker, again, they have labels for everything as well. And what's good about this is that even if you're not like big into Java, and like let's say you want to work with GitHub workflows, well, this would be a good opportunity to do that, right? More documentation or work on the build stuff, things like that. So that's another project you can look at as well. And I'm out of time, so I want to thank everybody for coming. And like I said, I'll make myself available in Discord. When I have more issues that I've added, I will let you guys know, and probably the next day or two. Obviously, if you're interested, you can still start now with what we have and start getting things up and going, everything. So I think that's it. So I don't know if we have time for questions, or you want to just
All right, thank you very much,
questions?
Kito. Thank you, guys. Can we drop some reaction? Yeah, yeah. Let's drop some reaction for Kito. Then we take some
Thank
questions.
you.
If you have any question, just let me know. You can just raise your hand so we can ask any questions. Thank you very much, Kito, for this wonderful session. I believe this session is going to be helpful. I don't know, Kito. I don't know if you can get like the list, those projects that you talked about. If we can have like a list of them.
Yeah,
If
I
we can
can
have like a list of them. I don't know. Just so that we can.
a list.
Okay, okay, okay. Thank you very much. Yeah. So I
Put it in the
can drop
message.
it and other people can. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I already dropped the links to the Discord channel.
Okay.
This to project, but Kito, drop the links to your projects, the documentation project.
Okay, I can do that.
I missed that.
All right. And you wanted them in the
All
Discord
right.
channel or
So
here?
thank you very much, everyone. Yeah. So
Here is fine too.
you guys.
Okay.
I'll share it. Sorry, Precious.
Yeah, I will also be tagging this Kito on. I'll be tagging Kito on Discord also. So if you have any questions concerning contributing to his projects, you can also like reach out to him. I mean, it will be fine because you already have the maintainer here instead of having to send a message and waiting for days for the maintainers to get back to you. All right. So during I saw some, I think a maintainer came to complain on Twitter that some of the people that reached out to her on her project, that they were not, they didn't know how to use GitHub. So we'll be having a GitHub session next week. With Alifatik. Alifatik is here. Alifatik, do you want to say hi?
Hi
So it's going to
everyone.
be a very practical. Hi. Yeah. Yeah. So we're having a session next week with Alifatik. It's going to be an open session. It's going to be a master class. So we are going to make it open to everybody. If you are here and you want to know how to use GitHub you don't know how to use GitHub for open source, we are going to take care of it in that session. All right. So just be on the lookout. I'm going to announce it on Discord and make sure you register. Make sure you register during. Make sure you register for the session. Right. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming. This session was recorded, and we are going to upload it on YouTube for for you. Yeah. So thank you very